The morning I discovered the truth, the coffee maker was broken. Such a small detail to remember when your world collapses, but there it is. I was fumbling with the machine, my arthritic fingers struggling with the filter, when Eleanor's phone buzzed on the counter. She was in the shower, had been for 20 minutes, which should have been my first clue. Eleanor never lingered in the shower unless she had something to wash away. The message preview lit up the screen. Can't wait to hold you again. The baby news changes everything. Richard Blackstone. Of course. The pharmaceutical executive who'd hired Eleanor as his personal nutritionist 6 months ago. The man who'd been so generous with bonuses, so insistent that she accompany him on business trips to maintain his dietary regimen. The man 30 years younger than me, with a fortune built on patents for painkillers that barely worked, painkillers I'd been taking for my hip for the past 5 years. I stood there, gripping the counter, my crutches leaning against the kitchen island. The same crutches I'd needed since the car accident 3 years ago, the accident that had taken my mobility, my career as a wilderness guide, and apparently my wife's respect. Eleanor emerged from the bedroom 15 minutes later, her graying blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing the new dress Richard had probably bought her. She kissed my forehead absently, the same way you'd pat a dog. I have a client meeting today, she said, not meeting my eyes. Might be late. With Richard? I asked, keeping my voice steady. She froze for just a moment. Yes, actually. How did you? Lucky guess. I smiled, the kind of smile I'd perfected during 40 years of marriage. The kind that hid everything. Have a good day, dear. After she left, I sat in my study, surrounded by the maps and photographs from my guide days. The Rockies, the Cascades, the Appalachian Trail, I'd led groups through them all before the accident. Before I became the limping old fool whose wife sought comfort in younger, wealthier arms. But here's what Eleanor didn't know, I'd been preparing. Not for this specifically, but for something. The accident hadn't just taken my mobility, it had given me time. Time to think, to plan, to remember skills I'd learned in Vietnam that I'd never told her about. Time to realize that a man with crutches isn't necessarily helpless, he's just underestimated. I spent the next 3 days in careful observation. Eleanor's patterns became clear. Gym at 6 a.m., she'd started that 2 months ago, another sign I'd missed, work from 9 to 5, except Tuesdays and Thursdays when she had her evening clients. Richard was always on those days. I hired a private investigator, paid cash, gave a fake name. The photos he brought back were conclusive but unnecessary. I'd already seen enough in Eleanor's behavior, the new jewelry she claimed was costume, the way she hummed in the mornings, the prenatal vitamins hidden behind her regular supplements in the medicine cabinet. 43 years of marriage, and she was carrying another man's child at 61. The irony wasn't lost on me. We'd tried for children for 20 years before giving up. The doctors said it was my fault, low sperm count from chemical exposure in the war. Eleanor had said she didn't mind, said I was enough. Lies, all lies. But I wasn't angry. Not exactly. Anger is hot and quick, and what I felt was cold and slow, like a glacier carving through stone. I felt the kind of clarity that comes when fog lifts from a mountain valley, and you can see every tree, every rock, every possible path. Richard Blackstone lived in a mansion in Aspen, complete with a private ski slope and a wine cellar worth more than most people's houses. He had a wife, too, Christina, a former model who spent most of her time at their house in Miami. He had children from his first marriage who barely spoke to him. He had everything, and he wanted my Eleanor too. The plan came to me while I was sorting through my old gear in the garage. Eleanor never came out here, said it was too dusty for her allergies. Hidden behind camping equipment and fishing rods, I found my old survival kit from my guide days. Rope, knives, water purification tablets, emergency blankets, flares. And in a locked box at the very back, items from an even older time, my service pistol, still clean and oiled, and other things I'd kept from special operations. Things a man hopes never to need again. The wilderness had always been my church, my sanctuary. Even with the crutches, I could still navigate certain trails. I told Eleanor I was starting physical therapy, doctor's orders to strengthen my hip. She barely looked up from her phone when I mentioned it, just murmured something supportive while texting someone who was definitely not a client needing dietary advice. In reality, I was reconditioning myself. Every morning after Eleanor left, I drove to the old trails east of town. Started with the easy paths, relearning how to move with the crutches over uneven ground. The aluminum supports that seemed so limiting on pavement became tools in the forest, testing ground stability, clearing brush, even vaulting over small streams. My body remembered more than I'd expected. Muscle memory from decades of guiding kicked in. Within 2 weeks, I was covering 5 miles a day. Within a month, I was back to reading game trails, identifying edible plants, finding water sources. The crutches slowed me down but didn't stop me. If anything, they made me more deliberate, more careful, qualities that would serve me well. I also started researching Richard's routines, his properties, his business dealings. The man was meticulous in his professional life but sloppy in his personal affairs. Eleanor wasn't his first mistress. There had been at least 3 others over the past decade. The private investigator, grateful for the generous cash payments, was thorough in his documentation. More interesting was Richard's cabin, a rustic retreat he'd bought 5 years ago, 60 miles north in the national forest. He used it maybe twice a year, according to the locals I chatted with at the sporting goods store. It was isolated, accessible only by a dirt road that washed out every spring. Perfect for a man who wanted privacy. Perfect for what I had in mind. I started leaving supplies there during my therapy sessions. Nothing that would be noticed, a cache of canned goods hidden in a hollow log, water bottles stashed in an old bear box, rope and tools concealed in the crawl space under the cabin. I was careful to leave no trace of my visits, a skill that came back as naturally as breathing. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Eleanor announced it over dinner, one of the few meals we still shared, though she spent most of it scrolling through her phone. Richard's invited us to his cabin for Memorial Day weekend, she said, not looking up. He wants to discuss a business proposition with you. I nearly choked on my pot roast. A business proposition? With me? He's interested in developing a wellness retreat. Knows about your background as a guide. He thinks you could consult on the outdoor activity programs. She finally met my eyes, and I saw it there, pity mixed with calculation. This was Richard's idea, probably. Throw the old cripple a bone, make him feel useful while I'm carrying your child. That's thoughtful of him, I said carefully. But I don't know if I'm up for the travel. The hip's been acting up. Oh, Harold. She reached across the table and touched my hand, the first genuine contact in months. It would be good for you. Get you out of the house. And Richard's cabin is beautiful. Very accommodating for people with mobility issues. People with mobility issues. Not you, not your condition. People with mobility issues, like I was a category, not her husband. When would this be? 3 weeks. Just the weekend. Richard will drive us up in his Range Rover. It's very comfortable. 3 weeks. I ran through my mental inventory of what I'd already cached at the cabin. It would be enough, more than enough. All right, I said, squeezing her hand. It sounds nice. It's been too long since we've had a weekend away together. She pulled her hand back, guilt flashing across her face. Yes. Together. That night, I heard her on the phone in the bathroom, water running to mask her voice. But I'd learned to read her tone through the door, excited, nervous, planning. She thought she was being clever. They both did. The next morning, I drove to a pawn shop 3 towns over. The owner, a Vietnam vet named Tommy who'd lost his leg to a mine, recognized the look in my eyes before I said a word. Whatever you're planning, brother, make sure it's worth it, he said, sliding a box across the counter without my asking. Inside were things I needed, things that couldn't be traced back to me. A hunting knife with no serial number, a burner phone, camping gear that had been through enough hands to be anonymous. I paid cash, and Tommy threw in something extra, a small device I recognized from our old recon days. Still works, he said quietly. Battery lasts about 72 hours once activated. Range of about 2 miles in mountain terrain. I nodded, understanding. A tracking device, the kind we used to plant on enemy vehicles. The kind that could tell you exactly where someone was, and when they moved. Back home, I practiced. Not with the weapons, I hadn't forgotten those skills, but with the performance. The stumbling, the wincing, the careful way a truly broken man moves. I'd been unconsciously minimizing my disability as I'd grown stronger, and Eleanor had been too distracted to notice. But Richard would be watching, evaluating whether the old cripple was truly harmless. I also studied Richard's medical history, hacked from his own company's poorly secured employee portal, made for interesting reading. Type 2 diabetes, controlled with medication. High blood pressure. Allergic to bee stings, severely allergic, requiring an EpiPen. The man who'd made billions selling pharmaceuticals was himself a walking pharmacy. Eleanor's medical records were easier to access, she still used my insurance, and the password hadn't changed. The pregnancy was confirmed, 8 weeks along. Advanced maternal age, high risk, requiring special monitoring. She'd been taking hormones for months to make it possible. The dates lined up with when she'd started her evening clients. I felt something shift in my chest when I read those records. Not heartbreak, that had already happened. Something else. Resolution, maybe? Or recognition. We make choices, all of us, and those choices have consequences. Eleanor had made hers. Richard had made his. Now I would make mine. 2 weeks before the trip, I had my first fall. Eleanor found me at the bottom of the stairs, groaning, my crutch, accidentally, kicked out of reach. She helped me up, fussing and worried, insisting I see the doctor. Dr. Martinez, who'd been treating me since the accident, was concerned about the muscle weakness I'd described, the tremors I'd practiced, the memory lapses I invented. He prescribed new medications, stronger painkillers, Richard's brand ironically, and recommended I consider assisted living. Your wife mentioned you're going away for the weekend, he said. Are you sure that's wise? It's important to Eleanor, I replied, letting my voice quaver just enough. And I don't want to hold her back from living her life. He nodded sympathetically and made notes in my file. Notes that would be important later, establishing my declining condition. Establishing that I couldn't possibly do what I was planning to do. Eleanor was extra kind to me after that, the way people are kind to dying dogs. She made my favorite meals, helped me with my pills, even sat with me one evening to watch an old movie. I could see her future crystallizing in her mind, the grieving widow, tragically freed by nature to pursue new happiness with the wealthy man who'd comfort her in her loss. The tracking device went into Richard's car during one of Eleanor's client meetings. I'd driven myself to the grocery store, something I rarely did anymore, and happened to park next to his Bentley at the office complex. Security cameras would show an old man with crutches struggling past the vehicle, pausing to rest against it, nothing more. They wouldn't show the small magnetic device attached to the undercarriage. The data it provided was illuminating. Richard's Tuesday and Thursday visits to Eleanor weren't his only stops. He had a Wednesday appointment at a different address, another woman, recently divorced, according to public records. He had a Friday stop at a pharmacy far from his usual haunts, paying cash according to the transaction patterns. The man was juggling multiple secrets, and secrets make people vulnerable. I also made other preparations. Letters written and post-dated, to be mailed if something went wrong. Documents copied and stored in a safety deposit box Eleanor didn't know about. A will updated with a lawyer Eleanor had never met, leaving everything to charity if she remarried within 2 years of my death, a detail she wouldn't discover until too late. Memorial Day weekend arrived with unseasonable heat. Richard pulled up in his Range Rover at precisely 8 a.m., stepping out in designer hiking clothes that had never seen a trail. He was everything I wasn't: tall, fit, full head of silver hair that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly mortgage. "Harold!" He gripped my hand too firmly, the handshake of a man establishing dominance. "Great to finally spend some time together. Eleanor's told me so much about your expertise. All ancient history now," I said, letting my hand tremble slightly in his grip. "But I appreciate the opportunity to consult." Eleanor emerged with our bags, having packed light for me and heavy for herself. She'd included my medications in a specially labeled case, making sure Richard saw how many pills I needed. The performance of the devoted wife, managing her declining husband's health. The drive took 4 hours. Richard drove while Eleanor sat beside him, leaving me in the back like a child or a dog. They thought I was dozing, lulled by the painkillers, but I was memorizing every turn, every landmark, every detail Richard mentioned about the property. "The cellular coverage is spotty," he said at one point. "But that's part of the charm. Real isolation. Real privacy." "How romantic," Eleanor murmured, then caught herself. "I mean, how peaceful." Richard's hand moved to her knee. In the rearview mirror, I saw him glance back at me, checking if I was awake. I let my head loll, mouth slightly open, the picture of medicated oblivion. The cabin was not what I'd expected from my reconnaissance. Richard had renovated since my last visit 2 weeks ago. New security cameras at the entrance. A modern alarm system panel by the door. Motion sensor lights around the perimeter. He was more paranoid than I'd anticipated, or perhaps more careful about protecting his secrets. "Let me show you to your room, Harold," Richard said, taking my arm as if I needed the support. "I've set you up on the ground floor. No stairs to worry about." The room was at the back of the cabin, small but comfortable. A perfect place to contain the old man while they enjoyed the master suite upstairs. What Richard didn't realize was that the window looked directly out onto the old ranger trail I'd scouted. The trail that led to my supply caches. Dinner was an elaborate affair. Richard had brought pre-made gourmet meals from some upscale Denver restaurant. He opened a $500 bottle of wine, making a show of letting it breathe, explaining the notes and undertones as if I were a child learning about grapes for the first time. "Eleanor tells me you were quite the outdoorsman," he said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "Before your unfortunate accident. 25 years leading expeditions," I replied, deliberately dropping my fork and struggling to retrieve it. "Had a good run. And now you're thinking about consulting on my wellness retreat?" I nodded, playing along. Eleanor showed me the prospectus. "Ambitious project. I don't do anything small," Richard said, refilling Eleanor's wine glass. His hand lingered on hers. "When I see something I want, I pursue it fully. That must be exhausting," I observed mildly. He looked at me sharply, but I was focused on cutting my meat with shaking hands, the picture of harmless struggle. After dinner, I excused myself early, claiming the drive had worn me out. From my room, I could hear them moving around upstairs, Eleanor's laughter bright and false, Richard's voice low and confident. At 11 p.m., the sounds changed, intimate, unmistakable. I put in my hearing aid's white noise setting and reviewed my plans. At 2 a.m., I slipped out the window. It was almost embarrassingly easy. The motion sensors were positioned for someone walking upright, not crawling. The cameras pointed at the obvious approaches, not the drainage ditch that ran along the side of the property. My crutches, wrapped in dark cloth, became silent walking sticks. The forest welcomed me like an old friend. Even in darkness, I knew these trails. My first cache was undisturbed: food, water, the special items from Tommy. I transferred some supplies to a closer location, a hollow tree 50 yards from the cabin. The GPS tracker showed Richard's Range Rover hadn't moved. The second vehicle I noticed on my reconnaissance, an old Jeep under a tarp, was still there too, keys probably inside. Richard's emergency escape vehicle, or maybe his wife's car from her rare visits. I was back in bed by 4 a.m., dirt clean from under my fingernails, clothes hidden in my suitcase. When Eleanor knocked at 7 to check if I needed help with my medications, I was genuinely groggy, fumbling with the pill bottles. "How did you sleep?" she asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Like the dead," I told her, and didn't miss her flinch. Saturday morning, Richard proposed a short hike to assess my mobility for the retreat planning. It was a test, obviously. He wanted to see just how helpless I really was. I gave him a show worth watching. Struggled on the easiest paths. Needed frequent breaks. Dropped my water bottle and couldn't bend to retrieve it. At one point I stumbled, and grabbed Richard's arm for support, apologizing profusely while planting a small device in his jacket pocket. Not a tracker this time, but something else from Tommy's box. Something that would emit a very specific frequency when activated. "Maybe this isn't such a good idea," Eleanor said, watching me wheeze against a tree barely half a mile from the cabin. "Harold's not up for this kind of activity anymore." "Nonsense," Richard said, but I could see him reassessing. The old man was even more broken than expected. "We'll take it slow. The retreat will have options for all ability levels." We turned back after an hour, having covered less than a mile. Richard was solicitous, helping me over rough spots, pointing out flowers and birds as if I hadn't spent decades teaching tourists about local flora and fauna. Eleanor walked ahead, impatient, occasionally checking her phone even though there was no signal. Lunch was on the deck, overlooking a ravine. Richard produced contracts for the consulting arrangement, surprisingly generous terms for what would amount to a few hours of advice. Guilt money, or payment for disappearing gracefully from Eleanor's new life. "I'll need to review these with my lawyer," I said, squinting at the pages as if struggling to focus. "Of course," Richard agreed. "No rush. We have all weekend." That afternoon they left me, napping, while they went for a drive to see the higher elevations. The Bentley's tracker showed them stopping at a scenic overlook 5 miles away, parked for an hour. I used the time to explore Richard's office in the cabin. His laptop was password protected, but the physical files in his desk were revealing. Property transfers, legal documents, prenuptial agreements, one with Eleanor's name already filled in, dated 3 weeks ago. They'd been planning the formal arrangement, while I was still believing in 43 years of marriage. More interesting were his medical files, tucked behind financial documents. The man was sicker than I'd known. The diabetes was poorly controlled despite medication. Recent tests showed kidney problems, liver enzymes elevated. The pills he was taking for various conditions would have dangerous interactions with certain natural substances, information I filed away carefully. I also found his gun safe, hidden behind a false panel. The combination was his birth date, amateur mistake. Inside were 2 handguns, boxes of ammunition, and interestingly, a sealed envelope marked, "In case of emergency." I didn't open it, but I memorized its exact position. Saturday evening brought a thunderstorm. The power flickered but held, Richard's generator humming to life. He built a fire in the massive stone fireplace, opened another expensive bottle of wine, and suggested we talk business. "The wellness retreat needs authenticity," he said, settling into his leather chair like a king on his throne. "People pay premium prices for genuine expertise. Your background, Harold, properly marketed, could be valuable." "Properly marketed," I repeated. "Meaning what, exactly?" "Well, we'd emphasize your glory days. Before the..." He gestured vaguely at my crutches. "People want to learn from someone who's been there, done that. The fact that you can't actually lead expeditions anymore isn't relevant." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably. Even she recognized the insult wrapped in opportunity. "So I'd be a mascot," I said mildly. "The old-timer with stories." "A valued consultant," Richard corrected. "Well compensated. Enough to ensure comfortable care as your condition progresses." There it was. The offer to buy me out of Eleanor's life. I pretended to consider it, then asked, "What makes you think my condition is progressing?" Richard and Eleanor exchanged glances. She spoke carefully. Harold, we've both noticed. The falls, the confusion, the trembling. Dr. Martinez is concerned. We want what's best for you, Richard added. Sometimes that means accepting help. The lightning flashed, illuminating their faces. In that moment I saw it clearly. They weren't just planning for my absence, they were planning to facilitate it. The prenuptial agreement, the generous consulting contract, the isolated cabin. Create a paper trail of a deteriorating old man who might wander off into the woods and never return. I appreciate your concern, I said, struggling to stand. I need to use the restroom. I made it 3 steps before my bad leg gave out. The fall was spectacular, crutches flying, body twisting, head striking the coffee table's edge with a crack. I lay still, counting silently as they rushed over. Harold! Oh God, Harold! Eleanor's panic sounded genuine. Don't move him, Richard commanded. He could have a spinal injury. I let my eyelids flutter, mumbled incoherently, then passed out. They debated calling for help, but the storm and lack of cell service made it impossible. Richard checked my pulse, performed basic first aid. They carried me to my room, laid me on the bed. I heard Eleanor crying, real tears, surprisingly. Guilt, perhaps, or frustration that I might die before their plan was complete. They stayed with me for an hour before concluding I was stable, just unconscious. Then they retreated to discuss options. Through the thin walls, I heard Richard insist they wait until morning to attempt driving me to the hospital. Eleanor agreed, mentioning my medications should keep me comfortable. At midnight I opened my eyes and got to work. The storm provided perfect cover. Thunder masked any sounds as I slipped out the window again. This time, I didn't crawl. This time, I moved like the soldier I'd once been, like the guide who'd tracked elk through these very forests. First, I disabled Richard's Range Rover, nothing obvious, just a small adjustment to the fuel line that would cause problems after about 10 miles. Then the old Jeep got similar treatment. If they tried to leave in a panic, they wouldn't get far. Next, I retrieved my supplies from the hollow tree. The device in Richard's jacket was activated with a simple radio frequency. Tommy had shown me how. Within minutes, it would start emitting pheromones that attracted specific insects. This time of year, the mountains were full of ground-nesting yellow jackets. Aggressive, territorial, and drawn to the exact chemical signature now emanating from Richard's expensive outdoor wear. The storm was passing, leaving fog in its wake. Perfect hunting weather. I positioned myself on the ridge above the cabin, despite the screaming protest from my hip. Pain was just information, and I had work to do. At 3 a.m., I triggered the first distraction, a flare fired into the old-growth section of forest, far enough away to not threaten the cabin but close enough to be visible. Then another, from a different angle. Then smoke canisters I'd cached weeks ago. To someone in the cabin, it would look like multiple fires starting in the forest, a natural result of lightning strikes. Richard burst out of the cabin first, half-dressed, shouting. Eleanor followed, robe clutched around her. They could see the smoke, the distant orange glow. Richard ran for his phone, cursing about the lack of signal. He made it 20 yards before the yellow jackets found him. His screams were instructive. The man who'd made billions from other people's pain had never really experienced it himself. He ran back toward the cabin, stripping off his jacket, but the pheromones had already transferred to his skin, his hair. Eleanor tried to help him, batting at the insects, which only agitated them more. "The EpiPen!" Richard gasped. "In my bag!" Eleanor ran inside. I counted slowly. She'd find the bag, find the EpiPen I'd replaced with a perfect replica filled with saline. She'd inject him, expect improvement, see none. Panic would set in. By the time she returned, Richard was on the ground, swollen and gasping. She injected him, waited for the medicine to work. When it didn't, her screams joined his. I descended from the ridge carefully, methodically. By the time I reached the cabin's perimeter, Richard was unconscious, his breathing labored but steady. Anaphylactic shock but not dead, not yet. Eleanor was trying to drag him inside, sobbing and cursing. Eleanor, I called softly. She spun around, saw me standing without crutches, and her face went through a symphony of expressions: shock, fear, understanding, rage. You, she breathed. Me, I agreed. Though I'm supposed to be unconscious in bed. Guess those medications weren't as strong as you thought. You did this. The bees. Yellow jackets, actually. Common misconception. And no, I didn't do anything. Richard must have disturbed a nest. Happens all the time in these woods. Tragic accident. She looked at Richard's swollen form, then back at me. He'll die without help. Probably, I said. The roads are tricky in this fog. Even if you could start one of the vehicles, which you can't, I'm afraid they both seem to have mechanical issues, you'd never make it to town in time. You're insane, she whispered. You're a monster. I'm a man who loved his wife for 43 years. I corrected. A man you were planning to what? Have declared incompetent? Commit to a care facility? Or were you thinking something more permanent? That prenuptial agreement in Richard's office suggests you've been planning this for a while. Her face crumbled. Harold, I never meant to get caught. I finished. I know. But here's the thing about the wilderness, Eleanor. It doesn't care about our plans. It doesn't care about wealth or beauty or clever schemes. It only cares about who's prepared and who isn't. Richard groaned, his breathing becoming more irregular. Eleanor dropped to her knees beside him, checking his pulse. I can save him, I said quietly. I have the real EpiPen. I have a satellite phone. We can get help here in 30 minutes. Hope flared in her eyes. Yes. Please, Harold. I'll do anything. I know you will, I said. That's the problem. You'll do anything for money, for comfort, for a younger man's attention. But would you do anything for me? For the man you promised to love in sickness and in health? I'll leave him, she said quickly. I'll come home. We'll work it out. I laughed, a sound that made her flinch. With his baby growing inside you? No, Eleanor. That's not how this works. Richard's breathing became a wet rattle. Eleanor was performing CPR now, compressions that would buy minutes, not solutions. I sat on a tree stump, watching, the real EpiPen and satellite phone in my jacket pocket. 10 minutes, I said conversationally. That's about what he has left. The swelling in his throat will close off his airway completely. The CPR won't matter then. Please! Eleanor screamed between compressions. Whatever you want. What I wanted was a faithful wife. I replied. What I wanted was to grow old with dignity beside someone who loved me. What I wanted was not to discover prenatal vitamins hidden in our bathroom and love letters on your phone. She stopped compressions, staring at me. You knew. All this time you knew. I've known for 2 months. I confirmed. Did you think I was stupid, Eleanor? Broken body, broken mind? I led survival expeditions for 25 years. I survived 18 months in Vietnamese jungle. I know how to read signs, track prey, and most importantly, I know how to wait. Richard's body convulsed. Not long now. Here's what's going to happen, I said, standing. You're going to make a choice. Richard dies here, tonight, a tragic accident. Wealthy man disturbs yellow jacket nest, allergic reaction, no cell service to call for help. His pregnant mistress and her disabled husband both in shock, unable to save him. Terrible tragedy. Or, she whispered, or you tell me the truth. All of it. What you were planning. Who else was involved. Everything. And maybe, I make a different choice. Eleanor looked at Richard, then at me. Christina knew, she said quickly. Richard's wife. She knew about the affairs. They had an arrangement. She gets the Miami house and half his assets in the divorce, which was supposed to be filed next month. But if Richard died before the divorce, she gets everything. I finished. And you get nothing. Unless you were married to him first. The baby complicated things. Eleanor continued, words tumbling out. Richard wanted an heir. His children from his first marriage hate him. Christina can't have children. So yes, we moved up our timeline. You were supposed to have an accident. Or wander off during an episode of confusion. Your body might never be found in these woods. And the consulting contract? Would show Richard trying to help you, give you purpose. Make him look generous when you disappeared. Harold, please, he's dying. I pulled out the EpiPen, held it up to the moonlight. This could save him. But here's my price, you leave. Tonight. Take Richard's car, I'll fix what I did to it. Drive him to the hospital. Tell them whatever story you want. But you never come back. You leave the state. You leave me everything in the divorce, the house, the pension, everything. You raise Richard's baby somewhere far away and never contact me again. That's it. She looked stunned. You're letting us go? Richard won't forgive you for this, I said. For leading him here, for the humiliation, for nearly dying. He'll blame you, not me, the helpless old cripple who was unconscious in his room. And Christina? When she finds out you saved her husband's life instead of letting him die, you'll have made an enemy who has resources you can't imagine. I could see her processing, calculating. Richard gurgled, foam at his lips. 5 seconds to decide. I said. 4. 3. Yes. She screamed. Yes, I agree. Give it to me. I tossed her the EpiPen. She scrambled to Richard, jabbed it into his thigh. Within seconds, his breathing eased slightly, enough to buy time, not enough to fully counter the reaction. He'd need a hospital, immediately. I fixed the Range Rover's fuel line while Eleanor loaded Richard into the back. She was crying, whether from relief or recognition of what she'd lost, I couldn't tell. How? She asked as I handed her the keys. How did you do all this? You forgot who I was before the accident, I said simply. More importantly, you forgot that a man can be broken without being helpless. The crutches were never a weakness, Eleanor. They were camouflage. Eleanor left at 4:47 a.m., Richard unconscious in the back seat. I watched the taillights disappear into the fog, then went inside and made coffee. Richard's expensive Colombian blend tasted particularly good that morning. I had 6 hours before anyone might question my story. 6 hours to reset the stage. First, I destroyed every trace of my nighttime activities. The smoke canisters retrieved and buried. The flares accounted for by lightning strikes I'd document. The pheromone device would dissolve completely within hours. Tommy's gear was good like that. I put myself back in bed, disheveled my appearance, even gave myself a real bump on the head to match the fall from last night. When the local sheriff arrived at noon, summoned by a garbled emergency call from Eleanor at the hospital, I was the confused, injured old man who'd just woken up to find everyone gone. Can't remember much, I told Sheriff Martinez, no relation to my doctor. Hit my head pretty hard. Woke up alone, tried calling for help when I couldn't find Eleanor or Mr. Blackstone. The sheriff surveyed the scene, the disturbed yellow jacket nest near the cabin. I'd made sure to leave evidence, the discarded EpiPen wrapper, signs of panic and hasty departure. Lucky your wife knew what to do, he said. Man could have died. Eleanor's always been good in a crisis. I agreed, allowing a note of pride in my voice. Is Richard all right? He'll live. Though he's already talking about suing someone, the cabin builder, the pest control company, anyone he can blame. Sounds like Richard, I said, then caught myself. I mean, from what little I know of him. The sheriff helped me to his car. Let's get you checked out at the hospital. That head wound needs looking at. At the hospital, I maintained my confusion. Dr. Martinez was concerned about the head trauma, insisted on keeping me overnight for observation. Eleanor had already been discharged. She'd fled the moment Richard was stabilized, according to the nurses. Richard was in the ICU, his wife Christina at his bedside. She'd flown in from Miami on a private jet. When she saw me being wheeled past, she stopped me. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice like cut crystal. "I understand you were injured trying to help my husband." "I don't remember much," I said carefully. She studied me with cold blue eyes. "How unfortunate. Head injuries can cause such confusion. Sometimes people forget entire relationships. Entire affairs." We understood each other perfectly. "I hope Richard recovers quickly," I said. "He will. And then we're moving permanently to Miami. The mountain air clearly doesn't agree with him." She paused. "I heard your wife had to leave suddenly. Family emergency?" "Something like that." Christina smiled, sharp as winter. "Well, I hope everything works out for you, Mr. Mitchell. You seem like a man who deserves peace in his golden years." Eleanor filed for divorce 2 weeks later, from Oregon. She didn't contest anything, signed whatever my lawyer sent. The speed was suspicious, but her lawyer explained she was dealing with a difficult pregnancy and wanted to avoid stress. The house, the pension, the savings, all mine. Richard recovered, though with some permanent scarring to his throat that gave his voice a raspy quality. His pharmaceutical company faced an unrelated FDA investigation 3 months later, anonymous tips about quality control, apparently. He and Christina relocated to Miami permanently. The wellness retreat project was quietly cancelled. I sold the house, bought a smaller place near the mountains. Started volunteering with a program that teaches wilderness skills to disabled veterans. Turns out, crutches don't stop you from teaching others how to survive. If anything, they make you more creative, more deliberate, more aware of your environment. Tommy from the pawn shop became a regular coffee companion. We never discussed that night at the cabin, but sometimes he'd look at me with knowing eyes and say, "The wilderness has its own justice, doesn't it?" Eleanor had the baby in Portland, a girl, according to the birth announcement that somehow found its way to me. She named her Sarah. I sent a savings bond in Sarah's name, no note, no return address. The child wasn't responsible for her parents' choices. A year later, I got a call from Christina Blackstone. Richard had died, heart attack brought on by complications from diabetes. The stress of the last year hadn't helped. She thought I should know that Eleanor hadn't been mentioned in the will. Neither had Sarah. "I wanted to thank you," Christina said carefully, "for whatever you did or didn't do that night at the cabin." "I was unconscious," I reminded her. "Head injury. Don't remember anything." "Of course," she agreed. "But hypothetically, if someone had orchestrated things to reveal the true nature of certain people, I would be grateful." "The wilderness reveals everyone's true nature eventually," I said. "It doesn't judge. It just exposes." "Indeed. Take care, Mr. Mitchell." Now I sit in my cabin, my own, bought with the divorce settlement, and write this account. Not for publication, not for vindication, but for Sarah. One day, when she's old enough, she might want to know about the grandfather she never met. The one who loved her grandmother despite everything. The one who could have chosen murder but chose exile instead. The one who understood that the wilderness doesn't care about our human dramas. It only cares about who adapts and who doesn't. Eleanor sends a Christmas card every year. No message, just her signature. I don't respond, but I don't throw them away either. They remind me of who I was, who I became, and who I chose to be in the end. The crutches still lean against my wall. I need them less now. The Swiss doctors Christina recommended did wonders, but I keep them as reminders. Reminders that strength isn't always visible. That the wounded can still be dangerous. That underestimating someone because of their age or disability might be the last mistake you ever make. The wilderness taught me that. Richard learned it too late. Eleanor learned it just in time. And me? I learned that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't taking everything from those who betrayed you. It's letting them live with the knowledge of what they've lost. 20 years hence. From the Journal of Sarah Blackstone, age 20. I found him by accident, or maybe the wilderness led me there. I can't be sure anymore. The old man sitting on the porch of the mountain cabin, whittling a walking stick with practiced, patient strokes. His German shepherd, Scout, announced my arrival long before I reached the door. "You have Eleanor's eyes," he said without looking up. "But thankfully, not her nature." I'd been searching for Harold Mitchell for 3 years, ever since Mom died, and I found the letters. The ones she'd hidden in a safety deposit box with my birth certificate, the DNA test results that confirmed Richard Blackstone was my biological father, and a savings bond from an anonymous sender that had matured to nearly $50,000. "You knew I'd come," I said. It wasn't a question. "The wilderness always brings people where they need to be," Harold replied, finally raising his eyes to meet mine. "Coffee?" His cabin was neat, organized with military precision but warm somehow. Photos covered one wall, not of Eleanor, but of mountains, trails, groups of smiling hikers from decades past. In one corner sat a pair of aluminum crutches, polished and displayed like artifacts in a museum. "You don't need those anymore," I observed. "Haven't for years," he admitted, pouring coffee from a pot that looked older than me. "Swiss doctors are miracle workers when you can afford them. But I keep them as reminders. Sit. You came for answers." I'd rehearsed this moment countless times, but sitting across from him, I forgot my prepared speeches. "Mom never told me about you." "Not really. Just that my grandfather was dead." Harold laughed, not bitter, but genuinely amused. In a way, she was right. The Harold she married did die. The question is, what rose from that grave? He told me everything then. Not the sanitized version I'd pieced together from old news articles about Richard's tragic accident at his cabin. Not the story Mom had mumbled through cancer-induced delirium about leaving a monster in the mountains. The real story? The whole truth. "You could have killed them both," I said when he finished. "No one would have known." "I would have known," Harold said simply. "And more importantly, you exist. Whatever Eleanor and Richard were, whatever they planned, they created you. That possibility stayed my hand more than any moral consideration. But you didn't know about me then." Mom wasn't showing yet. I knew about the pregnancy. 8 weeks along. Found the medical records. He refilled my coffee cup with steady hands. Every child deserves a chance to become their own person, not be defined by their parents' sins. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Scout settled at my feet, accepting me with the easy trust dogs offer to those they sense belong. "Mom died badly," I said eventually. "Liver cancer. She'd been drinking heavily for years. Said the guilt ate her alive, that she saw yellow jackets everywhere, even in her dreams." "I'm sorry," Harold said, and meant it. "Despite everything, I loved her once. That person deserved better than what she became." Richard's wife, Christina, she paid for Mom's treatment. Quietly, through intermediaries. Mom never knew. Harold nodded. Christina understood the value of keeping potential problems comfortable and distant. Smart woman. She offered to pay for my college too. I turned her down. "Why?" "Because I wanted to earn it myself. Like you earned your second chance." I pulled out an envelope, worn from handling. "I've been accepted to Colorado State. Forestry and Wildlife Management. I want to learn what you knew. What you know." Harold studied me for a long moment. "It's a hard life. The wilderness doesn't care about your feelings, your past, your family drama. It only cares if you're prepared." "Then teach me to be prepared." He stood, moved to the window overlooking the trail that wound up into the mountains. "Your mother thought the wilderness was empty space between cities. Richard thought it was something to be conquered and commodified. They never understood, it's not empty, and it can't be conquered. It's the most honest place on earth. No lies survive out there. Is that why you stayed? After everything?" "I stayed because this is where I belong. Where I've always belonged." He turned back to me. "The question is, do you belong here? Or are you just running from something, like your mother did?" I thought about the years of feeling out of place in Portland, the questions without answers, the mother who looked at me with love twisted by guilt and fear. The father I never knew, whose fortune I'd inherited but wanted nothing to do with. The grandfather who'd been erased from existence except for mysterious savings bonds, and now, this moment. I'm not running, I said. I'm searching. For roots, maybe. For understanding. For the part of me that comes from you, that Mom tried to bury but couldn't kill. Harold smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from him. Tomorrow, we start with basic navigation. No GPS, just map and compass. Think you can handle getting up at dawn? I've been getting up at dawn since Mom died. Couldn't sleep. Kept dreaming about forests and mountains I'd never seen. Genetic memory, Harold said. Your great-grandfather was a tracker in World War I. Your great-great-grandmother was one of the first female naturalists in Colorado. The wilderness calls to blood, regardless of how far we wander from it. Over the following weeks, Harold taught me everything. Not just the practical skills, though those came too, but the philosophy of survival. How to read the subtle signs of weather changes, the language of birds warning of predators, the patience required to wait for the perfect moment to act. Your mother's mistake, he said one day as we practiced building shelters, was believing comfort and safety were the same thing. Richard's mistake was believing money could buy both. But look at them, all that comfort, all that wealth, and they lived in constant fear. Fear of discovery, fear of each other, fear of the consequences of their choices. And you? What do you fear? Dying before I pass on what I know. Leaving the wilderness without someone who understands its justice. He paused in his work, looking at me intently. Perhaps that's why you're here. I learned that Harold taught wilderness survival to disabled veterans 3 days a week, that he donated most of the divorce settlement to establishing a scholarship fund for their children, that he'd written training manuals now used by search and rescue teams across 3 states. Redemption? I asked one evening. Purpose, he corrected. Redemption implies I regret what I did. I don't. I regret what led to it, but not the actions themselves. Every choice has consequences. I chose to let them live with theirs. Christina Blackstone visited once during my training. She arrived in a helicopter, landing in the meadow like some queen surveying her realm. She and Harold spoke privately for an hour while I practiced knots, then she approached me. You look like him, she said, meaning Richard. But you have Harold's spirit. That's fortunate. Did you love him, Richard? She laughed, cold and beautiful. I loved his ambition once. But love and business are different contracts. Harold taught us both that. She handed me a card. If you ever need anything, call. Consider it compensation for a grandfather stolen by necessity. After she left, Harold seemed thoughtful. She wanted to know if I'd told you everything. If you might become a problem. What did you tell her? That the wilderness had claimed you. That you were mine now, not theirs. And she accepted that? She understands the wilderness better than most. She knows it keeps its own. On my last day, before returning to start college, Harold gave me the crutches. I don't need these, I protested. Not for walking, he agreed. For remembering. Strength isn't always visible. Weakness isn't always real. The most dangerous predators are often the ones that appear helpless. Is that what you were? A predator? I was a survivor, Harold said. The difference matters. Predators hunt for pleasure or gain. Survivors do what's necessary to continue existing. Your mother and Richard were predators. I simply reminded them that even apex predators can become prey. We stood on the porch, watching storm clouds gather over the peaks. Scout pressed against my leg, whining softly at my impending departure. Will I see you again? I asked. Every time you're in the wilderness, you'll see me. In the proper way to read a trail, the patience to wait for the right moment, the understanding that nature's justice is perfect because it's impartial. He handed me a wrapped package. Open it later. The package contained his journal, not about that night at the cabin, but about every expedition he'd led, Every survival situation he'd encountered, every lesson the wilderness had taught him. The dedication read, asterisk, to Sarah, may you always find your way home, especially when you're lost. Asterisk. I call him grandfather now. Not because of blood, we share none, but because of something deeper. He gave me what Eleanor couldn't, an understanding of who I am beyond the circumstances of my birth. He taught me that we're all capable of terrible things, but what defines us is not our capacity for darkness but our choice to use or restrain it. The wilderness doesn't judge. It simply reveals. And what it revealed about Harold Mitchell is that a man can be broken without being defeated, can exact justice without becoming evil, can love someone who betrayed him while still protecting himself from further harm. Mom died seeing yellow jackets that weren't there. Richard died grasping for wealth that couldn't save him. But Harold lives, teaching others to survive, to adapt, to find strength in what appears to be weakness. And now I carry those lessons forward, into my own wilderness, whatever form it takes. Sarah Blackstonechen, written at Base Camp, Rocky Mountain National Park.